So improving the system is finally a question of aligning governance, management, financing rules, incentive mechanism in order to produce learning for all. Incentive is extremely important. We say we want good teacher, but what does a good teacher get in addition to what he would have gotten if he was not such a good teacher? We don't have incentive in our system. However, if it's not a performing teacher, lower performing teacher, they won't get the reward. I don't think so. They will get the same reward as everybody else, and that's a problem. So if we are serious about quality, we need also to think about, do we have the right incentive for quality? There are a relationship of accountability, of course, as I said. We need the feedback cycle, and the World Bank in its strategy has taken into account these findings. So from now on, we will try to link our financing to the result, not to the inputs. And we have about the same instrument that my colleague from the African Development Union talked about, and we are adding this year a new instrument where we can pay for results. For example, if a country comes to us and say, I'm going to increase the performance of students in such a national test or international test by standard deviation, which is in PISA, for example, equivalent to 4 months of education, that's worth a lot of money for us, and we will give the money for it. Now, invest smartly also. What is an education system? You have inputs, and we hope they are quality inputs, and we are hoping that we get outcomes through an education system which is like a black box. How do we illuminate the black box? How do we know how this black box functions? And here we are, there are things that are necessary and every Ministry of Education needs to put in place. We need system assessment and benchmarking. This is the first thing. You cannot improve if you don't know where you start, where you are going. And even if you improve, you will not be able to convince the Ministry of Finance that you have made progress, and you won't get the money. So an assessment system is the basics, the foundation. Still, no country in Africa I'm aware of have an annual assessment system that puts data at the disposal of schools, that sends them information how they are performing, so they can compare their performance this year to last year and to 5 years ago. They can compare their performance in math versus science, or science versus language. So we need to focus on this area. We need to put a lot of resources, a lot of thinking into assessment and benchmarking. We need education management and information, and EMIS. Everybody is talking about it. I'm still waiting to see one working well in Africa. It's complex, but we want to have a very, very complex information system, and we forget that we need to only the information that allows everyone in the education system to make a decision. And usually it's not much, but we come to it from a very centralized frame of mind, and people sitting on the top of the pyramid want to know everything: how many tables, how many chairs, how many blackboards, what every teacher is doing hour by hour. And it becomes extremely complex and costly, because we forget that feeding the beast is going to cost a lot of resources. And impact evaluation. We heard about a very interesting example, Taysir. Is it Taysir? So it's called Taysir, is a project in Morocco. In the World Bank we call it CCT, which is conditional cash transfer. Thank you, Jeffrey. Conditional cash transfer. So conditional cash transfer is an idea that is very simple. Let's give some money to every family so they keep their girls at school. It's a very interesting idea, but we have to prove that it's working, because it's costing money. How do we prove it's working? It took almost 2 years to have an assessment, because you need to implement the project on a population and then have a control group which doesn't get the support or the conditional cash transfer. And at the end, through very rigorous methodology, show that this group has achieved better results than the group that didn't have the intervention. We call this an impact evaluation. And we need more of this impact evaluation. They require capacity. Something very common in Africa, we spend a lot on teacher training, millions of dollars on in-service training. We don't know whether it improves the performance of teachers or not. We don't know whether students learn more when the teacher has been trained versus the teachers that have not been trained. What we need to prove it is an impact evaluation. And there are very few of them in Africa. And in the Middle East and North Africa, by the way. Measurement of learning and skills. Of course, this is also, as you can see, is very important. What I want to emphasize also that comparing learning across countries helps a lot to find out why such country is doing better, what policies they have been implementing. So this is in one slide basically showing that we can no longer focus on individual intervention or a collection or a set of individual intervention. We need to look at the system as a whole. It's a complex system, but we try to illuminate it, to make it easier to read through the 4 tools that we have here. And these are complex tools. What is the World Bank going to do about so this was about investing smartly, and I have been long now. Investing for all means simply that we need to invest we need to pay special attention to the poor. And there are multiple sources of disadvantage, but the most important among them is linked to poverty. These are the enrollment profile in 3 countries, Nigeria, Egypt in Africa, and Indonesia in Asia. What we see in all 3 of them, that the poor, which are in red, do not start school as often as the richer quintiles. It's very close in Indonesia, but still, even if they do, like in Indonesia, they tend to drop out more frequently than students from other areas. And this is a major, major phenomenon with major consequences, as I'm going to show. Because if we look at the performance of schools, and I have mapped here the poorest quintile in all these countries in Africa in red, and the blue quintile, the disparity between countries is sometimes much bigger than the disparities, the disparity within country is much bigger than the disparity between countries. So it's very important to imagine what would happen if these poor schools perform as well as the better of schools. What would happen is simple. This is the same graph in other countries, and it shows that disparities are less. But what would happen is the following. If we take the case of Thailand and Turkey and make the poor school in those countries perform as well as the rich schools, their performance would be as good as the United States, basically. So the gain, the potential gain from focusing on the poorly performing school is huge. But if you look at policies in most countries, there is very little focus. The policies are usually some national decision or measures that are applied across the board. So focusing on the poor, this is learning for all. This is a graph that I want to put also to show that there are 5 areas of development where we need to focus policy. The early childhood, we talked about it. Basic education, where we ensure that all students learn. Building job-relevant skills, this comes later. Encouraging entrepreneurship, it could come later, but it can also be built early. We shouldn't also forget the labor market. All this would not have any sense, any meaning, if we don't have a mechanism at the level of the countries that make the demand and the supply of skills meet, and information to tell the education sector what skills are needed by the economy, and also tell the individual where to look for jobs. And that's my last slide, which shows a little bit how we are going to implement our strategy. The strategic direction, so strengthen education system, looking at the system and the governance of the system and how the various parts of the system work together using this various tools I mentioned, and building high quality knowledge. We need to understand what works and what doesn't work in a much better way than we do now. What are the implementation levers that we can use? Knowledge, and we start by knowledge, although people, when they think World Bank, they think about financing. But knowledge is more important. System assessment and benchmarking tools. I said it's very important, and I repeat it. We need to have countries paying more attention to this. Learning assessment, impact evaluation and analysis for some area of policies that are not easy to measure, like teacher training. We need to make more effort to understand how it works, how they work. Financing and technical support. As I said, the novelty in there is that we are going to pay for results more often than we did in the past, although we did some of it, but not much. But we have a new instrument now that allows us to do that. And our institution wants to be result-oriented. If we manage to do that, we will have a much more effective financing. Multi-sectoral approaches are also important, and my colleague is going to talk about a nice example of multi-sectoral approaches, but also partnership tomorrow. And we think that partnership is extremely important for the simple reason that every one of the 53 African countries will not have the capacity to develop the complex knowledge that each country needs to develop its education system. But through the example of partnership that we saw and some of the colleagues mentioned earlier, we can use this knowledge in a much more collaborative way, and each country could augment the capacity, its own capacity, by using partnership. Here we are mentioning agencies, partnership among agencies, but we also attach a lot of importance to partnership between countries. Building this center of excellence, for example, that were mentioned by Mr. Ezzine, is something that we are trying also to implement in the Middle East and North Africa. Thank you very much. So this is the education strategy. It's invest early, invest smartly, invest for all. It's very simple, even at the end of a long day. Thank you.